So guys, let's begin. Now, the continuation of yesterday's topic will be in exception. We'll have to firstly understand the types of exceptions. Okay? We'll have to understand the types of exceptions that we have it in Java. Let's see the category of it. So, there are two types of exceptions that we have it in Java. How many types? Two types of exception. Now, what are these two types? Firstly, we have something called as checked slash compile time exception. Fine. The second one is called as unchecked slash runtime exception. So there are two types of exceptions that we have it in Java, and we will have to understand what is compile time and runtime. See, very simple, guys. In order to understand the compile time and runtime exception, let's assume now I have here a.java file. We all know this, that this a.java file, we will have to compile it. Correct? When you compile this file, we will get here a.class file. When you compile this file, we will get a.class file. What you will get here? A.class file. We have already talked about it. And once this dot class file we have, we will run this dot class file, and here is where we will get the output. Okay. Now, what are we trying to tell here in compile time exception is these exceptions that will occur, the exceptions that will occur when you're converting your .java file to .class file, or when you compile your .java file and if you get an exception, then it is called as compile time exception. Got it? What is it called as? Compile time exception. The process when .java file is being converted to .class file, during that phase, if you get an exception, then that is called as compile time exception. But in case if you get an exception, when you run your .class file, upon running the .class file, if you get an exception, then it is called as runtime exception. What is it called as? Runtime exception. I hope you got this idea now. What is compile time exception and what do you mean by runtime exception? So see this here. In Eclipse, what happens when I right click, go to new, create a Java project. Let me give this project a name, app underscore Java underscore 6. Now, once I create a project, I can now go to this project path. Where is this project created in my system? Physically, where is it stored in my computer? So right click, go to properties, and you see here one button. Under resources, one button. When you click on that, it will take you to the folder, take you to the path where my project is created. When I further go to that project, you see here there are two files present, src and bin. As of now, src file, the bin file, okay, and the src file, okay, are having some default module info.class. That is some default thing. By default, it is empty. Consider like that now. Forget about this. We'll talk about what is module info, which got introduced in the later versions of Java. In the later version of Java, we got this concept. We'll talk about that later. But for now, assume we have src folder, bin folder, they are empty. It does not have any code that I've written down. Fine. Now what will happen? Now what will happen is when I now create a .java file, let's say I created one a.java file in Eclipse. When you create this a.java file, that a.java file will get stored in src folder automatically. Are you understanding now? Again, when I create another file, let's say this is called as b.java file. Now this b.java file is also stored inside the source folder. Whatever .java files you're going to create, they are all going to be present inside the src folder. Now, this .java file are then automatically compiled by Eclipse. With the help of JDK, Eclipse will compile this, and the generated a.class file, a.class file and b.class file. The generated a.class file and b.class file, it's going to store that inside the bin folder. What is it going to do? Whatever Java file I create in Eclipse, automatically that will be compiled, and the compiled file will be present inside the .bin folder. Fine. Which means if I now create here, right click, create a class a.java. Now go to your project again. This time, when you go to your project again, inside src, you see that there is one .java file present. Got it now? And this is automatically compiled. I did not do anything. Eclipse is automatically compiling, and in the bin folder, it is keeping what? Did you understand this? The time of compilation and the code composition, which means when I compose the program, when I started writing .java file, moment I saved it after writing it, it immediately compiles a Java file and generates a .class file, okay, in just few seconds. Are you understanding now? Okay, see this here. Further, if I now create another file here, right click, new, create a class B. Go to your project, see, in src now, how many Java files are present? 2. Go to bin file, how many .class files are present? So here compilation is automatically happening in Eclipse. Okay, so this phase is called as compilation, where .java is getting converted to .class file. Now certain exceptions might occur when this Java file is converted to .class file. Okay, certain exceptions might occur when Java file are converted to a .class file. Did you understand, everyone? Okay. Now, these exceptions that occurs when Java file is converted to .class file, they're called as checked or compile time exception. See this here. If I now further go here and modify the code, I write a main method, syso 100. System time is 1247. Okay, I modified the program at 1247. If I now go back, look at the .class file, this also got modified at 1247. Got it? Okay. Now further, when I click on the run button, or if I right click and do a run as, this is where Eclipse will pick the .class file. Okay. Eclipse will pick the .class file, and with the help of JRE, because Eclipse is running using JDK. JDK has a compiler and JRE. So Eclipse is now using JRE. Using that JRE, Eclipse will run and give us the output. This is called as a runtime phase. So certain exceptions, like if I now divide a number by 0, if I now write this code and save this, is my code compiled? Yes, do you agree with that? Everyone, did I get any exception when the code got compiled? See this here, there is no exception. Okay, which means at 1248, I wrote this program, and at 1248, .class file is generated. The .java file is converted to .class file with this code, and I don't see any exception, which means exception is not occurring during compilation phase. But when I now click on the run button, it will pick the .class file, and now an exception occurs. So when did this exception occur? That's the question. Runtime. Because when I'm clicking on the run button, the .class file is picked, and then, okay, when I run, exception occurred. So what is runtime exception? Did you understand this now? But all exceptions will not occur when you run a program. It might occur when .java file is converted to .class file. Let's see some of the exceptions like that. Now we don't know what is file reader. I will talk about this file handling concept later. But file reader, for now understand, this is a class that can help me read the data from text file. I have some text file, I want to read the data, then I can use this. Now I'm writing a code here. I'm giving g colon double slash test dot txt. Observe. Did I now run the program? No. Correct? So moment I typed this code and saved it, 12:50 system time. The dot class file got generated at 12:50. Compilation took place. Moment the compilation happened, there is an exception, unhandled exception type, file not found exception. Now we don't know what is this file not found exception. But what you need to observe, this exception has occurred even me without running the program. Got it? Okay, everybody got this point? Yes, online students, did you understand this point? Please tell me. Please tell me. Don't use Notepad, Vivek. It's waste of time. Nobody in industry will use Notepad to write Java code and execute. Okay? It all looks good as a student. It's waste of time. Okay? People will use IDs, do the projects there. There's Notepad and all, waste of time. Don't waste your time there. Okay? See this here now. So look at this diagram and tell me, did you understand what is compile time and runtime? Firstly, write this diagram, then I'll give you notes for it, and then we will explore this in more depth manner. Is it done? Okay. So let's see this here now. What do you mean by checked exception? Let's define this here. Okay. Write down the heading checked or compile time exception. What does it mean? This exception will occur during compilation of the program. Okay. This exception will occur during compilation of the program. Unchecked, unchecked, or we can give here runtime exception. Now, what is this? This exception, this exception, this particular exception will occur during runtime of the program. This exception will occur during the runtime of the program. Okay, done. Now we'll explore this in more detailed manner. Fine. So further, in interview, they will ask you exception class hierarchy. What they will ask you? They will ask you exception class hierarchy. Exception class hierarchy. So this is very, very popular question. Fine. So let's see this here. Okay. So exception class hierarchy. Okay. No. Okay. Let's try to see this here. What is exception class hierarchy? So everybody write this particular heading. Now, what does this mean is how the classes of exceptions are organized. How the classes of exceptions are organized. Fine. So let's start with this now. So here I'll start opening up the exception classes one by one. Fine. So firstly, I will use this class exception. When I press a control key in Eclipse after typing, you can open that class, the built-in class. Moment I open that built-in class, I notice exception class extends throwable. We did not write this code. This is by default present in Java. This is how your exception classes are basically structured. Now, if I go to throwable, right, I see nothing here. It just implements some interface. We'll come to this interface later. Okay, we don't know interfaces yet. Okay, but now we are seeing throwable is a parent class and its child class is exception. So let's keep preparing the diagram here now. Okay, so what I see here is uh, I have now throwable as the parent class. Do you agree with that? The supermost class here is throwable. Fine. Now throwable has a child class called as what? Exception. So let me write that here. It has a child class called as what? Exception. Fine. Now, further, I will now go here and type the next class called as runtime exception. Now, if I open this class, you will observe that runtime exception is a child class of what? Did you understand now? Runtime exception is a child class of what? Exception. Okay. So here I will further write this down here that your runtime exception is a child class of exception. Now let's proceed further. We will now explore more classes. Now let me take here the first class is arithmetic exception. Control key, open that up. Arithmetic exception is a child class of, that's why it comes under the runtime exception category. What is runtime exception? Exception that occurs during runtime. So see, arithmetic exception. What is arithmetic exception here? Arithmetic exception is a child class of runtime exception. Fine. Let's proceed further. Let's see. See, there are a lot of exception classes. Okay. When we start working in projects, lot of exceptions you will tend to see. Hundreds of exceptions we will try to explore that. This is very basic level of understanding on exception that we are building it right now. But when you start working with projects, definitely there will be a lot of exceptions that we will encounter. Fine. But in interview, when they're asking explain Java exception class hierarchy, one basic diagram, and we should be in a position to explain that. Fine. The next one, we will look at null pointer exception. See, null pointer exception is again a child class of what? A runtime. So, shall I put that here now? Yeah. What is it? It is a runtime exception category. Agreed with that? Next. We will now see the next class. The next class, we will see array index. Array index. We will study all of that one by one. Further. Now, array index extends what? Index out of bounds exception. Index out of bounds exception extends what? Which means from runtime exception. Okay, let's again write that here. From runtime exception, I'm getting one class that is called as what? Array index out of bound exception. and its child class. Its child class. Okay, if you now go here, array index out of bound exception is a child class of. So can I now put that here? Yeah. Did you understand what we are doing here now? Yes, everyone. Okay. So this is the child class of what? Index out of bound. Index out of bound is the child class of. So ultimately array index out of bound exception is of the category runtime exception. Are you understanding this? Yes. Let's give some numbering here. So this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. And this one is basically 3.1. Okay, did you understand the numbering? 3.1 means it's a child class of. Okay, now let's continue. Now we will look at next exception. Okay, some of the important exception classes to begin with that we will study. Number, the next exception classes, number, format, exception. Open that up. Number format exception is a child class of illegal argument. Illegal argument is a child class of, which means illegal argument is a subclass of what? Is a subclass of what? Runtime exception. So let's give this a number 4. And under that, we will have 4.1, right? So child class of that. What is the child class of that? Number format exception. Are you able to understand how the hierarchy of inheritance is done here? So number format exception is a child class of illegal argument exception. Illegal argument exception is a child class of runtime. Runtime is a child class of exception. Exception is child class of. So all that classes that extends runtime exception comes under the category runtime exception class. Did you understand? Right? Okay. Now let's see some other exceptions now. Fine, we'll see some other exceptions. Like, let's search here for SQL exception. Fine, open this up. SQL exception is a child class of what? SQL exception is directly a child class of, this is the package name. I'll talk about this. This is not yet been covered in your batch. Okay. So this is another way to perform an import. Fine. But it is a child class of exception. So can I write that here now? It's a child class of what? Exception. Do you agree with that now? Anything that is directly a child class of exception is compile time exception. Did you understand? Anything that is a child class of exception is a compile time exception. Let's see further. Now, we have next one. SQL syntax error exception. So this is the child class of SQL non-transient exception. And non-transient exception is a child class of, and SQL exception is a child class of, which means, can I tell SQL non-transient is a child class of what? Is a class of what? Can you tell me? It is a child class of SQL exception. Fine. Now SQL exception child class is what? SQL, okay, SQL non-transient is a child class of SQL exception. Done. Next. SQL syntax error exception is a child class of SQL non-transient exception. SQL non-transient exception. But ultimately, the parent of all this is what? Exception. So if this is 1, this will become 1.1, 1.1, and this will become 1.1.1. Did you understand? Yeah? Everyone? Okay. Now, let's look at further. Now we will look at the next exception. The next exception. Okay? Access denied exception. Access denied exception is a child class of file system exception. File system exception is a child class of IO exception. IO exception is a child class of. Did you understand? Everybody able to understand this? So, exceptions child class is what? IO exception. So let's go here. Let's write this 2. IO exception. IO exception, right, is a child class of exception. Now, file system exception is a child class of file system exception is a child class of IO exception. Correct? Is a child class of IO exception. Done. Then access denied exception is a child class of file system exception. So this is going to be 2.2.1.1. Do you agree with that? Yes? Did you understand this now? Everyone able to understand the class hierarchy? Which means access denied exception is ultimately of the type compiled type, because they all are ultimately the child of exception directly. Any class that extends exception class is compiled type. Any class that extends runtime exception classes, runtime exception. Did you understand? Yes, everyone? Okay. Now we will look at next exception. We will look at next exception class. Let's try to look at here. File not found. File not found exception is a child class of is a child class of, which means IO exception has another child class, and IO exception is a child class of, which means file not found. Okay, let's go here. Let's write here now. So this is again 2.2.2 because it's a child class of what? IO exception. Correct? Do you agree with that now? File not found is a child class of IO exception. So it is 2.2. Okay. Next, let's go here. Now we have something called as class cast exception. Let's see what is this. What is this inheriting? Okay. See, what is it inheriting? Runtime. So class cast exception will come under which category? Runtime. So let's paste this here. Fifth one. It is class cast exception. Fine. Next, we have other categories which we will see further. Write this much of diagram. Then further we will try to explore that. Okay. This you have to practice several times. Get familiar with it. Most of the diagrams that you will see online will not be accurate. Not all, but most of the diagrams are not accurate. So be careful about it, right? There will not be much clarity about it. See, at least this one, IO exception, SQL exception, class not found. See, IO exception, SQL exception, okay, IO exception, SQL exception, under exception. So be careful with the diagram. We are directly taking the classes as how it is organized in Java. We are picking it from there. Okay? So that has to be very correct. Done? Okay. Now we'll look at next one is class not found exception. Class not found exception. Class not found exception is a child class of reflective operation exception. Reflective operation exception is a child class of, which means we have reflective operation exception, correct? And its child class 3.1 is what? Class not found exception. Did you understand? Yeah. Let's see. Did you understand this now? Okay. Uh, okay. So make a note of these things. See, we can keep adding more and more classes. As I said, it's a very big concept. More about exceptions we will be learning. But firstly, let's explore these classes one by one. Fine. We'll explore these classes in our coming lecture one by one in a detailed manner. That why this class, what's the purpose of this class, and what kind of exception is it throwing. Done. We'll stop here. See you next class Monday. We have alumni meet this time on Sunday. Saturday I'm not there. I'll take alumni meet on Sunday. Okay, which is at 12:30 Sunday. I will conduct alumni meet. We will continue with that culture of alumni meet every week, right? Since I'm not available this Saturday, alumni meet will happen on Sunday. Fine? Okay.